Shalom, everyone. This is Rabbi Stuart Dauermann from Interfaithfulness, where we're building bridges, where history builds walls. And I'm here today with Dr. Bruce Stokes, who's an associate of mine on a project we're doing. So before we tell you about that project, hello, Bruce. How are you?
I'm doing great, Rabbi Stuart.
That's terrific. That's terrific. The project we're involved in is called the CHavurah Action Initiative. Because there's no place like home for the people of God. Bruce and I share that conviction. And a Havurot, what is it? It's a familial household gathering where people get together, eat together, pray together, and grow together in life together with God for the sake of others. It's a familial spiritual community, a place for what we call face-to-face spirituality. And in pursuing that, we're starting today a series of broadcasts, which we call Table Talks. And let me just show you something about that. There you see it up on your screen, Table Talk, because in a Havurah, people sit around the table. That's the way it was. The early Yeshua believers were table fellowships. As a matter of fact, the Havurah that started with the Pharisees in the first century were table fellowships. And so Bruce and I meet around the table here in Table Talk, and we discuss various subjects related to Havurot. And that brings me to this question. Dr. Bruce, how did you get interested in Havurot?
Well, I came through a process. I started out in a non-religious home. In my teen years, I got exposed to this faith through Youth for Christ. And so my experience was in the parachurch world. In fact, I even got involved in ministry in that way. And we hardly went into churches or congregations unless we were raising money, or giving a report. So my experience was a very isolated individual faith. And I didn't have a sense of that. But the Jesus movement was exploding. So we were trying to establish a house church similar to a Havurah. And what happened was I didn't know how to do it. And it really had problems.
When was this? Was this 30 years ago, 40 years ago? When was
this? Was in 1968 and 9.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I crashed with that one. And all the problems were relational problems. Then I discovered congregations, and I got exposed to a congregation that really was relationally based, and the people really were part of a healing for me. And after that, I began a house church that was really made up of people who had to work weekends, so they couldn't go to services at normal times. So we met on Tuesday nights, and we did everything that a congregation would do, but this time it had a relational connection. There was a family gathered together in a home, and the dynamics were very different. I've always kept that in mind. Even in later congregations, I've tried to develop that relational model of life-to-life relationships.
Do you think that the location of the Havurah, meaning that you were meeting in a home, rather than in a meeting hall, do you think that structure had anything to do with the way in which you related to each other?
I think it does for two reasons. One, if you go to a traditional worship service, everybody's sitting in pews. They're all facing Long Beach at the same time, and there's not interaction. Now, early synagogues and congregations really sat around the rooms. And so you could hear each other and talk to each other and give testimony, do all the things that the apostle talks about in 1 Corinthians 14. You can't do that when it's built more like a stage and a show. You become more passive and you just sit there. So I really think the relational nature is enhanced by that setting.
I visited many years ago, I visited a North African Orthodox synagogue in Los Angeles. A man I knew from Morocco brought me there. And it was very interesting because the whole room was built in a square. People sat on all four walls. This
Mm-hmm.
is very interesting to me. I'd never seen this before. They sat on all four walls, and the shulchan, the bima where the Torah was read, was there in the middle. But they
Right.
sat on the four walls. They knew the whole liturgy by heart, and so they kind of sang it like they were a cheering section.
Mm-hmm.
They did the whole liturgy. It was glorious, but everybody had eye-to-eye contact. In
Yes,
fact, there were children crawling under the table where the Torah was, and that was
exactly.
all right. This was
Right.
all a big family gathering, and it was an entirely different ambiance than the kind of theatrical models that we have, you know?
It's the family ambiance, because if a family gets together for Thanksgiving or something, they don't set the kids off to another room and put someone in charge of them. And then they don't put the teenagers out here. The whole family interacts together. It's noisy, it's informal, but it's familial and it's relational.
And do you think that Havurot takes care of business slightly differently than a different kind of structure? Uh, are there things that will normally happen better because of this kind of familial gathering?
Yeah, I think the relational nature of the uh, situation provides for roles, and roles are reciprocal, and so you have the parental role, and you have the child role, you have the adult child role. Those things change between people, so one person isn't the same role to everyone. They have multiple roles in multiple places, and it really does create a relational networking that is unlike anything you're going to get in a more structured system.
You know, I have a different story, but I ended up very much in the same place. As I've reflected back on my life, I realized that all of the significant spiritual growth in my life, and I've been a Yeshua believer since 1962, all of the significant growth in my life has been in the context of these face-to-face type home group type gatherings. For example, when I first came to Yeshua faith, I was invited to have lunch in the cafeteria of Manhattan School of Music, and where we had a discussion group while we were eating, a discussion group on the Bible. And within 7 weeks, God had really made a move on me, and I came to believe in Yeshua. But it was in this face-to-face, eye-to-eye, person-to-person relational context. And through that, I met some people who were involved in what was called a college and careers Bible study group. They met on Sunday at 5 p.m. And that was also face-to-face. It was, in a sense, like a Havurah. And we also met for prayer in one of the apartments of one of the people. I think it was once a month. And that was very much like a Havurah. Again, it was smaller. It was highly relational. It was face-to-face. It was life to life. It was person to person. Then eventually, I got involved in a house church in New York before I moved to California. It was called the Bronx Household of Faith, one of the greatest groups of people I've ever spent time with. They still exist. And in that house church, we also had these familial relationships. And it bred a different kind of accountability, a different kind of love flowing back and forth from people to people, a certain relational richness. And it occurs to me also that Paul uses a lot of relational language when he talks to his
Yes.
congregations. He talks about being brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers. And he's not kidding. Now, you're an anthropologist, so I know you know all about these different kinds of family structures. What would you say about the familial structure of the early Yeshua groups?
Well, the groups were certainly, there were some of their relationships that were what anthropologists call consanguinal. They were biological relatives. But then there's also people who are legal relatives, adoptions and marriages and that kind of thing. We call that a phenol. But the larger context that Paul is using when he talks about brothers and sisters is what we call fictive relationships. And a fictive relationship is based on the role that that person plays in your life. We've all had mothers or fathers that really weren't mothers or fathers. They were just like an extra one. I actually had 3 grandmas when I was a kid. And I asked my mom one day, I said, Grandma Pete is Dad's mom and Grandma Gladys is your mom. Who's Grandma Castor? She was a lady around the corner from us. And she said, Bruce, Grandma Castor's not your real grandma. And I said, you want to bet? Because she grandma'd me more than anybody. The other 2 lived 500 miles away. She was there every day thinking I was wonderful. And I thought she was wonderful. That's fictive relationships. And Yeshua said that those relationships are more kingdom based than the blood relationships and the affinal relationships.
Very interesting. Well, we got a lot more to say about this, and Bruce and I are very, very deeply involved in that, and that's why we formed something called CHai, C-H-A-I. Of course, CHai means life, but we take the initial letters of CHai, C-H-A-I, and use it for a phrase, the CHavurah Action Initiative, because we believe that groups like this are foundational to the life of the people of God. It's not like this is a kind of a little frosting that goes on the congregational cake. This is the cake, and we want to be talking about this quite a bit. In fact, I send out every week a Shabbat home discussion guide that people use in their homes, and soon we're going to begin doing a column in there, maybe once a month, maybe more often, about table talks and about the CHavurah idea. And before we go to that, I want to invite you all to subscribe to this channel you're watching, and we'd love to have you involved. So subscribe and link up with us. And also, maybe you want to get this Shabbat home discussion guide, which we call Shulchan Shalanu, our table. And you can do that by going to www.interfaithfulness.org/Shulchan. That's www.interfaithfulness.org/Shulchan. And you can go there and pick up a free copy of Shulchan Shalanu and see what it's like. And I hope that some of you will bite the bullet and subscribe, like many other people do. Well, Bruce, you and I, we've had a good time today, but we're going to have to say bye-bye for now. What else? Is there one final thing you want to say about Havurot that we need to remember?
Well, I think we need to remember that in the early congregations, it was the households and the Havurot that were the building blocks of the congregation. It wasn't the congregation as the main thing. It was these households